Chapter 2. Abigail stood knee-deep in a marsh. She looked down at her once white pajamas, now filthy and stuck with mud and leaves. Where am I? She thought. She looked around, and nothing seemed familiar. A bright flash caused her to cower out of shock, and the flash was followed by the untamed chattering of wildlife. The shrieks of birds grew louder, and she covered her ears with her hands, closed her eyes tightly, and crouched further into the muck. A secondary flash occurred. Abigail was able to see it through her eyelids. She opened her eyes to see a fire had erupted around her. The fire was closing in on her, so she unclenched her fist and started running. The flames flickered their way after her, dancing along the tops of trees, leaving a trail of embers about Abigail. She ran as fast as she could until she came to a brick wall. She was surrounded by flames. There was nowhere else to go but try to go up the wall. She jumped into the wall and extended her arms as high as she could reach, but it was no use. She looked back and saw that her bare feet were being kissed by the flames, yet she felt no pain. She looked back at the top of the wall and a form appeared. The illuminating glow of the fire revealed that Todd Peters stood atop the wall. He reached out a hand to Abigail and asked her to take hold. Abigail grabbed onto Todd's hand and was pulled temporarily out of harm's way. On top of the wall, Todd embraced Abigail, pulled away, flashed her a smirk, then leaned in and whispered, "Goodbye, Miss Winthrop," into her ear. Todd then dropped himself off the wall into the flames. Abigail jumped after him, but instead of feeling a sensation of being burnt, she shot up in her bed. Breathing heavily, Abigail strained her eyes through the darkness and patted down her body as if to make sure she was in one piece. She pulled her hands away from her body, dripping with sweat. She could not decide if the moisture was a result of the humidity in the room or a result of her dream. She determined that it did not matter, since she was awake now. She took a glance at her clock, which read 4:33. She was surprised she was able to get as much sleep as she did, all things considered. Abigail turned and placed her feet onto the carpeted floor, knowing that it would be futile to attempt to fall back asleep. She performed her morning rituals and then sat down with her notebook, finally having quiet time to escape into her work, forgetting all about the woes of her life, and finally becoming complacent. She finished deriving her heat equations when an uneasy feeling overwhelmed her. Todd had taken home half of the work she had done. She knew she would be attending his wake today, but would it be inappropriate to ask Nancy for the papers? She did not want to think about it any longer. Since her notebook was getting barraged with tears, Abigail packed up her work and laid out her clothes of mourning, which she would bring to work and change before she headed to Todd's wake. Following every movement with a sigh to help fight back more tears, Abigail was finally ready to embrace the challenges of the day. She rode her bicycle in the heat, less people out on the streets than she had ever seen before. The roads were practically empty, besides the occasional car that roared by. Abigail thought it to be peculiar, but continued on her way. Abigail arrived at work and was relieved to not be the first one there. Nina greeted her with a smile that was painstakingly masking a frown, and her eye makeup was smeared, evident that she had been crying. Nina ran up to Abigail and threw her arms around her. "This place will never be the same." Abigail, not wanting to show weakness at work, decided not to share her emotions and stood there motionless, and immediately changed the topic. "Why are the streets so empty today? Didn't you hear? Riots have started everywhere." "Really? Riots? For what?" "Because people feel like they're being lied to. Protesters have marched on City Hall demanding answers. They say it was an experimental weapon gone wrong." "That is absurd. How large is this mob?" "Well, it is growing in numbers, but not everyone is with them. Some are just looters who are stealing from the closed stores. No one wants to leave their homes. It's dangerous out there." "I had no idea. If you knew the danger, how come you came to work today?" "Abby, if you saw where I lived, you would understand. I am safer on the streets than in there." "Well, I have some work to do. But if we're the only ones, I will work out here to keep you company," Abigail said with a smile as she walked to her office. Abigail did not particularly care for Nina's companionship, but knew that she would serve as a good distraction for Todd's passing. And sitting alone in the room that they shared for many years would just be torment. Abigail returned to the reception area, placed her papers down, and pulled up a seat. The two worked quietly through the morning, aside from a dull tapping of a keyboard and the occasional rustling of papers. As lunchtime approached, Nina stood to stretch her legs. She walked over to the glass doors of the building and stared outside at the desolate city. "What is happening?" Nina asked as she turned towards Abigail. Abigail raised her head from her work to look at Nina, but something outside caught her eye. It was a gray, spherical projectile making its way towards the building. "Watch out!" Abigail cried as she lunged at Nina, knocking her out of the way of a large rock that crashed through the glass doors. Covered in shards of glass, Abigail raised her head to find the source of the projectile, and to her dismay, a band of several armed men with bats and sticks headed towards the facility. Abigail should have known that when rioting begins, research facilities are usually a target since they have the potential of harboring drugs and medicines. Abigail helped Nina to her feet, cradled her papers in her arms, and pulled Nina further into the building. "Run, Nina, run!" The two ran, not knowing the intentions of the intruders, but not willing to wait to find out. They ran for the back exit of the building, but once they opened the door, a second mob was waiting there, trying to climb through a barred window. When the two women pushed the door open, a well-dressed man darted his eyes at them and reached for the door. Abigail tried to pull it shut, but it was too late. The man had already formed a barricade with his forearm. Abigail turned and pulled Nina stealthily into a bathroom and motioned to keep quiet by placing her finger over her lips. "What do we do, Abby? They're going to eventually find us in here," Abigail thought as she better organized her papers. She heard the breaking of glass and violent rummaging through the walls of the bathroom. "If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Please explain." "We wait by the door and listen for when no one is right outside, and we slip out of the bathroom and start breaking stuff. Others will think we're just all part of the mob, and we will slowly make our way out to the street." "What about our clothes? Will they think we are with them?" "I don't think rioters have a dress code, so I think we'll be all right." Abigail and Nina followed through with the plan, slipped the door open, and slunk into the main area of the facilities. Abigail saw a few surrounding a storage locker, rocking it back and forth to try to tip it onto its side. Abigail immediately kicked a nearby desk and bent over to delve into the contents of its drawers. Nina followed by picking up a desk lamp and hurling it into a wall. No one seemed to pay any mind to the two as they crept out of the building and towards the street. Abigail tightly clutched her papers all the while. Abigail's jaw dropped at the sight of the city streets before her. Less than an hour ago, the streets were peaceful, and now, the once isolated city was now victim to mass destruction. Hundreds of angry people marched through the streets, filtering in and out of stores, carrying as many goods as they could. Complete chaos surrounded them, and even amongst the madness, Abigail knew she had to make it to Todd's wake. "I need to go to Todd's. Will you join me?" "Of course. I do not want to be alone in this mess." Unfortunately, Todd's home, where the wake was being held, was a few miles away, just outside the city limits. Recognizing it would be useless to attempt to drive Nina's car through the streets and unable to carry the two on Abigail's bike, they had to walk. They walked in horror through the insanity of what society had degraded to, all because of the weather. They watched each rioter dripping with sweat, some dripping with blood, and many toppling over from heat stroke, resulting in them being brutally trampled. Abigail clung to Nina so that neither would trip and meet an atrocious end. They trekked for hours, and the sun was finally beginning to set, granting them with at least the comfort of the rays not bearing down upon them. Since they were now outside the city limits, the riots had subdued, and they were able to pick up their pace. They arrived at Todd's residence and knocked on the door. Todd's sister answered, still crying over her loss. "I'm so sorry, Nancy," Abigail said as she placed a hand on Nancy's shoulder. Nina did not say a word, just showed them inside to the living room, where a dozen or so empty chairs sat. Abigail knew that the room was empty because people did not want to leave the comfort of their homes, even to mourn the loss of a great man. Abigail became visibly angry at the thought of no one paying their respect to a man that would have gone out of his way to cheer someone up or offer a helping hand. Nancy picked up on the tension in Abigail's face. "It is all right. Todd would not have wanted people to get hurt just to be here. I am all right with it. I'm sure the only one he wanted to show up is right here now. He adored you." Abigail was touched at the truth in the words, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "He was the only true friend I ever had." Nancy took a few steps back and picked up Todd's briefcase off a coffee table. "I spoke with him last night, before it happened. and he mentioned that you two had a breakthrough in what is happening, I think he would want you to finish up the work. It was his passion, and I am sure it is yours as well. Nancy extended the briefcase to Abigail, who gently grasped it. The three women sat in the living room for the remainder of the night, every now and again partaking in solemn small talk, but, for the most part, remaining silent. Abigail considered what her actions should be. She knew that Nina would prefer to stay as long as she could to avoid not only the walk back, but the dangers that may reside at her home. She also did not want to leave Nancy alone, since Todd was her only family. Abigail then considered if Nina stayed with Nancy, then it would be all right if she left, but she was also not looking forward to the walk back to her place. I apologize, but... I know, Nancy interrupted. You have so much work to do. Twice as much now. Why don't I give you a ride home? You mind if I stay the night? Nina asked of Nancy. This way neither of us have to be alone. Abigail admired Nina's ability to not dance around the issues and speak her mind. I think that is a good idea, and I would love a ride home. Since I know stubbornness is hereditary, I assume both you and Todd got it from your parents. I will not try to convince you not to drive me. The three smiled and loaded into the car parked in the driveway. The radio turned on along with the car, and the station was announcing more news as it unfolded. Official, it has now been confirmed with satellite imagery that coastlines are retreating. To accompany the worldwide temperature increase, the ice caps are melting quicker than ever and increasing the ocean levels at alarming rates. I have here with me Dr. Nancy turned off the radio. I do not think we need to hear any more of that. We are all going to drown. I do not believe it, Nina said in shock. I do not believe it either, Abigail said, much more skeptical and right-minded. The ice caps are currently in water. They displace water just by being there, and the volumetric displacement of the ice is much greater than that of water. It does not make sense for the ocean levels to be rising drastically just based off a temperature increase. I feel like we're missing something. Well, I know how much Todd thought of you, and if anyone was smart enough to figure it out, I'm putting my eggs in your basket, Nancy said with a smile. Abigail spent the remainder of the ride considering factors she had not yet considered in her research, but was not coming to any conclusions. Before she knew it, they arrived at her apartment complex, and she departed with brief farewells. Abigail returned to her home and did not waste any time. She spread Todd's and her own papers around and paced back and forth, speaking aloud to herself. Abigail worked through the night, running numbers, comparing charts and graphs, writing down ideas, and it was not until the morning dusk broke that it occurred to her. It is not the weather that is changing the earth. It is the earth that is changing the weather, Abigail announced. She hurriedly grabbed a few choice papers, threw on a fresh pair of clothes, and sprinted towards City Hall. She arrived in a panic state, adrenaline pumping from the run, but awkwardly off balance from her sleep-deprived nature. Abigail climbed the stairs to the entrance of the building, but alas, it was not open. She glanced at the clock tower, which implied that no one would be there to open up the building for another 45 minutes. She took the time as a gift to reclaim her breath and gather her thoughts. With the importance of the message, she had to be in the right frame of mind. Abigail descended the stairs in search of anywhere to get a cup of coffee, and along the way, she noticed that the protesters were once again starting to congregate. "Do not let them lie to you!" a man shouted to Abigail as she walked by. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, unkempt and unshaven, and wielding a picket sign that was currently blank.
"This is a conspiracy cover-up. Weapons of mass destruction are the lies. This time they brought the war home."
Abigail, intrigued by the obscurity of the comments, decided to invite him into a debate. She was going to use this as practice for her presentation to the city officials. What if it's not the government conspiracies, but a planet conspiracy? What if the weapons you speak of were not mechanical in nature, but nature itself? What if we have overstayed our welcome? Perhaps it's just time for us to go. The protesters stared at Abigail in confusion, and Abigail realized how absurd she sounded. She turned and walked away, glad she said those words so that she can refrain from saying them later. She found her coffee and sipped it as quickly as possible without suffering scalding injuries. Abigail disposed of her coffee cup and once again ascended upon City Hall. She was delighted to be able to open the door this try. She approached the mayor's office. A man whom she had dealt with before, and therefore knew that he would see her.